Let's do this thing.
Hey, thanks for checking another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. Hey, you come here for good advice, and we got more of it today. We have a round two conversation with one of my favorites and with one of your favorites. That's why they're back on a round two call. It's Courtney Kirschbaum. She's the top career strategist for people who are in Fortune 500 companies in the Big Four. And if you're an executive, you're somebody listening and you're thinking about, hey, what's next for my career? Maybe you're thinking about a lateral move to a different business, or maybe you feel kind of stuck in your current business, but you know kind of where you want to go, but you're not sure how to get there. Courtney is absolutely the expert who's going to teach you how to get there and coach you through it. She's also the author of Freedom Through Strategy, found on Scribd. I'll have the link to that in the episode description below. And you can also find out more at CourtneyKirschbaum.com. Courtney, so great to have you here.
Hey, it's good to be here. It's good to be back. It's good to be back. I was thinking about our last talk as I was preparing for this call, and it's like, the circle will be unbroken and all that. It's good to be back.
It's crazy because I was looking at the date. You were on episode 105. We're now post 300 episodes, May of 2020. So 2.5-ish years ago.
Wow, it was that late. It was May. I was thinking, when was it? It was because I was doing a consulting project up, and I was in New Haven, Connecticut, up at Yale, remember?
We would have recorded it like early 2020, probably. So it was probably recorded in like January, February, but then published in May would be my best guess.
That makes sense. That makes sense because I remember it being cold, and I don't think we were in the full throes of COVID yet. So, yep, I'm with you. I'm with you.
No, and it's crazy because it's funny how like you have these people that you connect with who, like I was telling my wife, we were talking about LinkedIn, and I was like, one of the coolest things about LinkedIn is I feel like I have developed like these genuine relationships with people where it's like, oh, I love that person. Like anytime I see content from them. And so you're one of those people. Anytime I see your content, anytime, I have an excuse to tag you, I'm like, oh man, I love what Courtney's doing. But then it's funny where you're like, oh my gosh, has it really been like almost 3 years since we've had like a conversation? It's just wild to me. So
I feel the same. I feel like I'm connected with people that, like on my email list or people that will email me occasionally. I'm like, oh, like you're my person. So yeah, I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what are you doing these days? What are you working on?
These days, I've been doing a lot of writing. Like I've always been one of these people who kind of looked at resumes like, God, why isn't there a better way? So I've been doing a lot of storytelling and a lot of writing. And I've been working with, I've had some really interesting clients, really interesting. I worked with a surgeon, which is a little bit out of my realm. And, you always learn things from people. So mostly writing is consuming my time. I post a lot of stuff on Medium. So that's something that when I started my business, I wish I'd known how bad a writer I was when I worked as a corporate executive and how important it is to be a good writer. So that's like a big thing for me. And then of course I'm here, right? I mean, we went through COVID since you and I last talked, and that's no small thing.
We made it.
So yeah, I made it. I have this feeling of triumph. And those are the main things. Actually, there is a third thing. I am one of the big things, and COVID brought this to the fore, is I'm a big remote worker. I have been for years, kind of by accident. Like 15 years ago, when it was like everybody was doing the commute and going to the office, I was traveling around. And if I wasn't traveling, I was working from home. Nobody said a thing. It was like, this is just how we work. So it was interesting to see the rest of the world get on that bandwagon, and now kind of like where it's settling.
So like in the work that you're doing, you as a remote worker at like high levels of organizations, I know that many companies are embracing hybrid models. Does that still apply for like the higher echelons of a business? Like are executives doing hybrid work, or is it more that's for like our middle to frontline staff, but as executives, as top line employees, like you're there, you're involved, you're engaged. Like what does that look like post-COVID?
That's a really good question. My experience is this. Depends on the company. Like, look at Elon Musk, who's totally in the news cycle right now. He's like, come into the office. If
for
you
all the
were
right
remote,
reasons, sure.
yeah, right. Get into the office or it's over for you. So it really depends on the company. One of my most successful clients is daylighting. Do you know, it's like a trendy term right now. Daylighting means you have more than one job. And some people actually literally cannot survive with more than one job. And for years, people have been like a waitress at night and maybe had an executive job during the day. Or once I knew a waitress who was a stewardess. But now it's like white collar workers who are in such high demand. They're like, oh, I'm going to work 2 jobs and I'm not even going to keep it a secret. Some people keep it a secret. So this guy has 3 jobs. He does not go into the office ever. And he just sent me a screen print a few days ago. He had 4 recruiters message him on LinkedIn.
Wow.
So there's that person, and he's a C-level person. So then there are people who are like, hopping in the car with their coffee mug, commuting to the office, working 9 to 5 and coming back. I tend to work with people who want to like get ahead of the curve, who want something different. Right. And just to kind of give you the full picture, when I started working with that person who is now daylighting and is super successful, I was literally on the train home from New Haven because COVID had like hit us. It was like, everybody go home. Mm-hmm. And he was working an office job. And I asked him, I said, why are you still going into the office? Like, you are so sought after. So it does. I mean, to answer your question, it depends. So if you're out there and you're thinking, you're looking in the press and you're thinking, well, I missed my chance. Nope, you sure did not. You still can do it. You just have to make up your mind that that's what you want. And kind of, the old saying, you get what you settle for.
Yeah, no, I love that expression. And there's been some drama around this topic, though, in the professional circles. I know there was a CEO who fired some of his employees because he found out they were daylighting, they were working these other jobs. I don't know if I was just naive. When I was working at this executive coaching company, and it was a 9 to 5 job, but then I picked up a job as an adjunct professor at a local university. And to get there, I needed to leave around like 3 or 3:30 because the class was at like 4:30 or something. And it was once a week. And so I remember going to my boss and being like, hey, on Wednesdays, I need to leave at 3:30 because I have this thing over at the university. Is that okay? And she was like, yeah, sure, no problem. But again, me being naive and not knowing any different, I didn't even realize this was a source of drama. But like I mentioned, I think part of the drama is that, you have the CEO who let go a couple of people, but then sort of the pushback on there has been this conversation around executives who are working a multitude of jobs, or maybe they're sitting as a board member on a few different boards. They're managing a variety of roles. Have you been paying attention to this conversation? And if so, what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, the biggest thing right now that I'm doing for people is, it used to be, salary negotiations, or they were just trying to figure out, what they wanted to be when they grew up. And now most people are talking to me about, this is the employment contract they sent me, and I don't feel good about this. And I'll give you a couple of examples that show up again and again. One is, they don't specifically say that you can't have other jobs, although some do. At an executive level, Microsoft has passed, kind of basically changed their HR policy that if you are below the executive level, there's no non-compete. Like, those are being legislated out of existence because they've been so successful suppressing salaries. So people come to me and they say, I don't want to sign this. And one of the things is that you will agree to any future rule or kind of policy that they implement. So basically, wow, a blank check, just sign here and say, no matter what we say, you'll agree to it. That's one of them. Another one is, this is really common, anything you create during your time with us is ours, and you have no moral, ethical, copyright, trademark. It's ours. Like, I just want to ask them, like, are you high right now? Tell the truth. How many fingers am I holding up? And it's like, are you joking? Like, I'm writing a book on the side, or I'm doing this. And it used to be, that's this relic from like 20 years ago when you stayed with the company your whole life and got a gold watch. I mean, how long has it been since anybody did that? A long time. So it's still happening. It's still happening.
Well, I was thinking about a business I worked with who they were like, hey, anyone you talk to, meet, interact with belongs to us, not belongs to you, like in terms of like your book of business. And it was even like people that you don't directly meet, but someone else mentions to you. And I was like, so if someone finds me on Facebook, like through a mutual connection, they belong to the business. And they're like, well, yeah. And I was like, you literally must be high, because not only is this insane, this would never hold up like any kind of court of law. But it is interesting though, and I don't get too off base because I know you're doing some pretty incredible work, but and I want to dive into that. But it is interesting though. I don't know if out of touch is the right word, but it definitely feels like in some of these larger businesses, there is a bit of a disconnection between what they envision and what I guess the perspective of the job seeker, right? And so I even think of there was one business I was talking to that was basically hiring out people to do work for them, and they wanted to do a 90-10 split with the people that were going to go do the work, and they couldn't find anybody. And I was pointing out this disconnect of like, well, do you understand how it feels when you're the hired person, when you get 10% of the paycheck when you did all the work and someone else takes 90? But it was hard to bridge that disconnect, if that makes sense. So
it makes perfect sense. I see a lot of that. And also I see a lot of people who they'll send me their employment contract and I tell them two things. Take this to a lawyer, and a lawyer who is on your side. Like I've had people take stuff to lawyers and the lawyer is like, oh yeah, this is standard. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't care if it's standard. It's like, you're on my side, right? So you get somebody to look at the employment contract, but also I've had people take the employment contract back with notes and the person's like, yeah, no. Like it does happen, but it's going to take people saying, I'm not signing off on this before companies get the message. So I guess my message to anybody out there listening is, it happens and it's probably going to happen to you. Let it happen, because that's not a deal you want to make. You don't want to sign away anything that you create. You don't want to, if they want to pay you 24/7, then absolutely sign the no, quote unquote moonlighting clause. And they can pay you 24/7, 365. But if they're not willing to do that, times are changing, and those folks are going to retire, or they're just going to get ground down, because you can't survive if you don't, you can't survive if you don't change. And this environment is requiring people to change the way they've done business for the past 10 or 15 years.
So I want to dig into that comment right there, because I totally agree. It feels like in like the hiring world, there's always this kind of subtle, like the subtext of the power dynamic. Like where does the leverage lie? Like, is it falling more in like the employer's position or more in the person who's seeking the job? And I know during the the Great Resignation, which I don't know if we're still in it or not in it, but essentially this conversation over the last year or so of people, and actually there's a misconception. A lot of people think it's like a frontline hourly worker who's quitting en masse, and it's actually mid to senior level people who are quitting. Yep. But this conversation of like, where does the power dynamic lie? If you're seeking a job, like how much do you stand your ground versus acquiesce to some of these kind of questionable things? And I've even seen it kind of overt, where I saw someone who was hiring, they posted on Facebook, frankly, how pissed off they were that people coming to the interview weren't, just is going to make her sound so awful. It was awful, but she didn't say it this way, but basically like wasn't like expressing enough gratitude that they were getting interviewed. And I remember
they're not obsequious enough. Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's great.
Like, oh, I'm so grateful to be here and thank you for this opportunity,
right,
rather than a business, like an even business exchange.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah. And I love that you add that on, because that's exactly what I'm noticing. And, as you're talking to people and you're talking career strategy, and, I'm sure even some of the most confident people who've had incredible careers, I'm sure there still is a level of anxiousness and trepidation around applying for jobs again. What does that look like when you're coaching someone to sort of kind of own who they are without being overly I guess that's the question. Like, how do you owning yourself regardless of how a company how much power they're owning? I guess kind of a clunky question, but I hope you know what I mean.
I do. I think I do. Let me start by saying one of the greatest quotes I've ever read, and I probably overuse this. And it's from a guy named Gary Halbert, who's a very gifted copywriter, and he wrote a series of letters, actually from prison to his son. It was a federal camp prison that has since closed down. And this is what he said in one of the letters. He said, "There's no justice, only power."
Hmm.
There's no justice, only power. And I think people come into the work arrangement thinking that it's just, and and I did. So I'm not preaching. I'm totally like saying I did this, and a lot of people do it, even experienced people. You you apply for a job and you expect justice. And I think the first kind of aha moment is you need to understand, no, like you're not going to get justice. There is no justice, only power. So that's the first thing. And companies kind of encourage this by saying, welcome to the family, and on and on. It's like, are you kidding? It's like I've worked in companies where someone passed away. For the first few days that they didn't appear on meetings, everyone like razor cut them to death behind their back. Where is so-and-so? I can't believe they didn't show up for a meeting. Then like on the 4th or 5th day of that week, we found out that the person passed away. And I'm pretty sure the company sent flowers. And then the discussion was totally around, I wonder if there's a promotion for me in this. And that sounds like an episode of The Office, but these were good people. This was an okay environment. But the fact is, no matter how good people are or how good the environment is, it really is about just how can I get ahead? And everything else is kind of an illusion. And when you're drinking the Kool-Aid and you're in that environment, people are like, oh, well, you're just cynical or you're bitter or whatever. But it's like that kind of tagging people and shaming people with those words only keeps them from kind of protecting themselves.
So how do you kind of marry, because I guess I can see how it could be cynical, but how do you marry like the realism of someone you're coaching with, like, hey, it's business. This isn't like a justice seeking thing. So like, how do you marry that realism with also the excitement that someone's probably feeling when they're thinking about possibility? Like, where could I be going next? What could I be doing next? Like, how do those things work hand in hand with your work?
Well, really, to answer your first question, the thing that matters, that brings it all together and kind of marries that kind of justice and excitement is confidence. That is it. It all comes down to confidence. I have a friend who says confidence is the new currency. It's kind of the old currency too, because when it comes down to who's getting promoted, who's getting paid, who's getting the job, it's not skills as much as a company wants to tell you it is. I mean, if you're a brain surgeon, maybe, but for the most part, it's confidence. It's your ability to kind of, I hate this is pejorative and it shouldn't be, to kind of wheel and deal and to realize that they are not giving you a job. It's not a gift. It is a negotiation.
Right.
And that is the most difficult transition. Like I work with people who are, maybe they've been managers for a long time and they're like, why can't I get a seat at the table? And inevitably it's confidence. And to do that, to be confident and to come in and say, okay, I'm no longer a manager or senior manager, I'm a director or I'm a VP. You have to kind of take off your old coat and put on your new one. And this shows up in marriages, in friendships, in everything. So really, the first thing I would say is you want to be really honest with yourself about how confident are you? Because what I get a lot is, well, it's this nemesis. It's this office nemesis that is keeping me from getting ahead. It's like, no, darling, it's you. I hate to break this to you, but it is 100% you. So that's the first thing. And then understand that confidence is like a muscle. Confidence is not fixed. It is dynamic. And unfortunately, people think, well, first of all, if you didn't get it by the time you're 10 years old, it's over for you. You can't get it, but actually you can. And you don't see it very often because there's this myth of like, well, if I didn't get it when I was a kid, if I didn't get it in my home, if my, parents told me I was worthless, then I can never be anything else. I will always feel this way. And that's not true. Confidence, you raise your confidence by surviving a series of small risks. And then as you survive those risks that you take, your confidence increases and you take bigger ones. And that's how you see these people who are bulletproof. But if you look around your office and you see people who are like, oh, this person seems to be just getting ahead and getting promoted, and what have they got that I don't? Ask yourself if it isn't confidence.
Well, and I think I love how you source it back to the person in question, because I've seen people post on LinkedIn. I knew one guy who he was interviewing and he got shot down from like 5 or 6 emails or interviews, and he posted on LinkedIn basically smudging these other businesses in the mud a little bit, being like, I'm amazing. Like, how could you not hire me? And I was kind of like, bro, I would not post that.
Yeah.
But I also knew him personally, and I was like, you're kind of not really that good of an employee either. And so I love what you're referring to is kind of like this looking at yourself in the mirror and having this kind of conversation of self-awareness, which, by the way, like in the work that you're doing, how often are you kind of having to, I guess, pull the shades off someone's eyes or kind of welcome them into like evaluating themselves, especially if maybe they haven't done it too much in the past? Like, what does that process look like?
I was telling someone recently, employment and a job hunt is one of the most intimate relationships you'll ever have, because it's so deeply embedded in your self-esteem, and nobody wants to talk about this, but it is. So when I try to get people to take 100% responsibility, because that's what it is. Don't tell me the story about how you've been used and abused, because if you kind of flip that around, the question isn't why did they use and abuse you? It's why did you allow yourself to be used and abused? Now that has some legitimate answers. And one of them is the mortgage and kids in private school or, whatever.
Right.
So first of all, forgive yourself a little bit, because those are real responsibilities, but follow that up really quickly with, okay, the situation's not great. And there are some practical reasons I need to stick this out, but I have to take responsibility for my part in this, and I'm going to move on from here. I think the main thing people don't want to do, and this comes from that corporate culture, and I know I'm like tarring everybody with the same brush, so I acknowledge that I'm doing that. Don't flip out, and kind of like stigmatizing mistakes. It's like, so you took a job. This happens a lot. You'd be alarmed at how often this happens. You take a job and they're like, oh, you're going to be doing this and you're going to be doing this. And it's going to be so exciting. And this is an exciting environment. And they put you in a cubicle and you're like crunching numbers or like changing the column colors in spreadsheets. And you're sitting there and you're like a senior person and you're like, what is happening to me? Like, how did this happen? The first thing you do is you blame yourself. Like, you totally got bait and switched. And this happens all the time. Companies will advertise for a job and then they'll just put you in whatever slot they have because they're waiting for the job. They're waiting for the bid process to finish or whatever, whatever. But the first thing you need to do is not blame yourself and be like, oh, bait and switch, got to get out of here. But what people tend to do is they tend to be like, I'm going to make this work, which is a great 100% responsibility attitude at the exact wrong time. So I think forgive yourself. Like the employment process and the career process is gradual. It's learning. Like all of the things that I teach or coach or strategize, I'm not like, some, Oracle at Delphi. I made all these mistakes. I mean, some of them couple, 3 times just to make sure I came away with a lesson. I'm sure you've seen the meme. So it's not like you'll have the occasional epiphany, but for the most part, if you just approach your career as kind of a 2-pronged thing, like I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to forgive myself for any mistakes that I may have made. And secondly, I'm going to take 100% responsibility and move on. And you hear a lot of, and I know this resonates with your listeners, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to fight my way back and I'm going to, have this glorious triumph at a company. And usually when you're in that mindset, it's like, no, you should just leave. Just to give it some thought. If you're thinking that if you're in the position, like you're going to fight your way back, is that you kind of maybe just getting the cart before the horse.
Yeah. Well, and I even think about moving people to action. Let's talk a little bit about the stereotype of, the person who's been in their career, they've been in that business for 10, 15 years, maybe less or more. And they know they need to leave,
Oh,
but
yeah.
they're stuck. They're thinking about the mortgage. I mean, if you turn on any news article these days, it will inspire fear and terror. So you have maybe someone who's a parent, maybe someone who they're taking home, they're taking care of maybe their own parents, like maybe their parents staying in the home, and they're thinking about the bills and things. And so it's like, oh, I can't go get another job now. I can't make a transition now. But at the end of the day, they are deeply unhappy with their job. And maybe outside of happiness, maybe they're also not getting financially, they're not getting paid for what
Yeah.
they're actually worth, right? So like, what does that conversation look like for your customers who they're curious about the next steps, but they're ultimately their feet are stuck in the mud?
Oh, that is such a good question, because that is so many people. I think the first thing is realize that you are not alone. Like if you're sitting in your cubicle or your office and you're like, God, I hate this job, but I can't leave. Know that you are in, like, we're talking 50% of people. Okay. So the first thing, couple things, get out of your like little solo pod and find a group, be that a book club, a mastermind. I tell people to mastermind all the time because it is so unbelievable to get out of your own space and let other people in, which is something that in our culture today we seem to be doing less and less of, and God knows COVID didn't help. Although you can do masterminds on all my masterminds now I do on Zoom. Like it's perfect. The value in that is you have solidarity. You have somebody saying, oh my God, I mean, I see you as this amazing person. Like you've been in this job for so long, you think that's who you are, but this
Mhm.
is what I see. So that's one benefit. Another benefit of getting with other people is you never celebrate your victories, right? Because especially in the corporate world, it's mistakes are stigmatized. You're only as good as your last project. But if you're with a group of other people, then they are like, oh my God, you worked for, I was in a mastermind and somebody said, you worked for Deloitte, like you worked in the Big Four. And I saw that experience through her eyes. And suddenly, to me, it was like old hat. So there's that part of it. So you don't want to go it alone. So if you were you feel stuck, find a group, an hour a week, an hour every 2 weeks, some body, and it doesn't have to be a paid group. It doesn't even have to
Mhm.
be like experts. Get people so you're shifting your perspective, and you are, even if you're an introvert, you're getting some different energy. That's the first thing. Next, realize I tell all my clients this when they first come to me. As a senior person, it's going to take you 6 months to a year to find your next position. I think what people want is kind of like we just had this $2 billion lottery jackpot, right? And all these
Right.
people who don't normally buy lottery tickets, when the chance of them actually winning goes down, and again, I'm not preaching because I bought two, you rush to the store and you're like, all right, how do you buy a lottery ticket? And you buy your lottery ticket. And overnight, someone is not even 100 millionaire, but a billionaire. And I think that's what we want. We want overnight to have success, because even when it's not, it's portrayed that way,
Mhm.
right? Famous. I was like, overnight success, Selena Gomez. Overnight success, so and so. But what you don't see is all the work that went up to that, right? That's
Mhm.
in their documentary on Netflix, but it's like they lived that. So it took a long time, and it's going to take time. So that's the second thing. Realize this is going to take time, but you have to start. And that is the third thing. Just start. So that is take a class. Start. I mean, this is so like light your lavender candle and like take a bath, but start a victory log. Like start getting out of this kind of doom and gloom attitude. It's like,
Right.
start documenting what it is that you're good at doing. One thing that I tell people to do, and I've started because people kind of won't do it, is give someone that 10 questions, hit the record button on your phone, and let them interview you. Because the things that come out of your mouth will blow your mind. And let me just give you a sample of some of the questions, because I've got them here. What are the top 3 tips you give someone entering your field or profession? all of a sudden you're talking about your profession in a totally new way. You're just a totally untilled part of your brain is getting some light of day. Another one is, what's the biggest compliment you've ever received? Who is it from and what was the context? Again, that's just when you start talking, the things that come out of your mouth are like, whoa, where did that come from? Let me
Right.
see. Oh, and these are, some of these are pretty, I mean, they seem benign, but here's one. What's your genius? What does everyone say? Oh my God, you are so good at this. And what I find is people don't believe it when they hear that. My mother used to always tell me, God, you're such a great writer. And I was like, well, of course you're going to say that. You're my mom.
Right.
But then I went and published a book, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, maybe she was on to something.
Yeah,
So,
I love this conversation of, your genius that is so normalized to you that you don't realize, the talent that's actually behind it. But I also, just as I was listening to you, I was just thinking about how exciting it can be to talk to other people, like you were mentioning, like getting around like-minded people. And because I think a lot of times the reason we get stuck in our job is like we just don't, we just assume everyone kind of feels the same way, in the sense of like no one's actually quitting their job and moving on or doing different things. Like we're all kind of miserable together. And when you finally have that conversation with someone who is thinking a little bit differently, it's just always exciting how it kind of opens your eyes. Like I've had conversations in the past where I've been like, oh, like I was talking about the podcast, where someone will say like, well, hey, do you charge like advertising? And I'm like, well, no, I could never charge that. And I've had people who are like, why not? Like, why couldn't you? Like, here's some examples of people who do that. That wasn't like a subtle plug for advertising on the podcast, but I will say I found myself, when I'm not chatting with other people, it really limits my daily perspective on the events that I'm experiencing. So I think it's great advice for sure. And also, just listening to you, I think what's really exciting, Courtney, is I don't know if your customers feel this way, but I could definitely see a customer coming to you envisioning working with you as very transactional, like you having kind of the bullet point list of like, yeah, I need your resume, this, this, this. Okay, great. I'm gonna send you on your way. It sounds like it's so much more than that. You mentioned how the job hunting process is kind of intimate. It sounds like the kind of advice and work you do with your customers is very personal and provides a lot more than maybe what a typical career strategist would do.
Oh, for sure. I think that's perhaps one of the biggest surprises that my clients have. Because if you think about your career, it is one area where you are like, I have to do this myself. It is very much I'm going to John Wayne it. I mean, if you want to learn how to play the piano or play tennis or do yoga, you go and you find an instructor. Like, it's like you wouldn't dream of like doing it yourself. I mean, that would be unusual. But more so than with other things, people feel like they have to kind of manage their career on their own. And if they don't, it's like a personal failing. Like, I
Right.
should be able to handle this. So really what I do, and I do help people, I do think writing is important, and I do help people with their stories and, to reframe their, mainly LinkedIn. Everybody talks about resume, but your resume is like third or fourth in line, because what people see first is your LinkedIn, but it's personal. And I think people come to me and they're like, yeah, and some people do, they come to me, I write their resume, or I help them with their LinkedIn and help them with their bios and do some writing. And then they're like, I don't want to deal with this personal stuff. I just want you to tell me how to get a job. And they kind of disappear into the ether. And other people are really kind of hungry and they want to figure this out. They're sick and tired of being sick and tired. So it is definitely, when it comes down to it, everyone's searching. It's interesting. Like, I need to work on my resume, and it's like they think the resume is somehow like the port key, right? Like
Right.
from Harry Potter, the
Yeah.
character would grab the port key and the port key would take them to some amazing place. And that's what they think their resume is. Like, it's this port key. It's like, no, it's
Yeah,
really not.
I understand the reference, but I will be honest, some people gave me a really hard time for not knowing. I've never
Oh,
read the books, and so
oh
I had
no.
some friends who just went to Harry Potter World, and they're like, "Yeah, they had and they were like naming like foods or something from the books," and I was like,
Right.
"Oh yeah, I don't know," and they were like visibly like what's wrong with you?
How can this be that you don't
I
know?
was like, but I get the port key reference. I kind of see what you're saying with it. So you are right, though. It is interesting. I mean, honestly, I think this goes into like what makes it partly very challenging as a professional, not just a job seeker, is social media is so interesting in that people are saying, like here you have Courtney being like, hey, the resume isn't the number one thing. And actually,
Yeah.
and I know that's right, by the way, because I just talked to someone yesterday. I don't know if you know Janayat Iqbal, who does the No Degree podcast, basically helping people get jobs who don't have degrees.
Oh, wonderful.
But he was basically talking about, yeah, I mean, resume, they're going to skim it. It's literally not like the holy grail for applications.
Yeah.
But I think about the poor, this poor job seeker who's similarly seeing someone who's maybe their main service they're offering is resumes, who are like, the resume is the most important thing. So
Yeah.
I just empathize with professionals today because social media, there are so many different takes on it that it can be very challenging to, wade through what's actually right and what's not. And for our listeners, I mean, Courtney has 50,000 followers on LinkedIn. I would assume that what you're saying is obviously valuable and trustworthy, but like I said, for the average business expert, though, or business job seeker, excuse me, it can be a little overwhelming for sure.
Yeah, it really can. There's so much advice. There's so many people out there who, are claiming expertise. And the one thing I would say to anybody is, and I do this, I always have like a first meeting with people, because if we don't hit it off and you're, I'm not your person and you're not my person, then it's not going to work. And you really do need to find somebody who's is going to sync up with you and understand what's going on with you. And that's why I used to be a bit more general. And I realized my world, the sea that I swam in, was the Big Four and Fortune 500. Now I work with higher ed folks, and I've also worked with surgeons, but and we found it. We were a great fit. We had a blast working together. Some of these people I'm still working with, but as a rule, the people that I really get what they say in just a few words, like name that tune in 3 notes. Now I'm really dating myself. Are those people who have experience in the Big Four, kind of made their bones in the Big Four or Fortune 500. So
no, that's great.
Somebody that you're like simpatico with.
Yeah. Well, Courtney, shockingly enough, we're actually towards the end of our, our podcast episode. So really quickly, I want to promote the book. I want to talk about the book and spend a few minutes here. So you published this book in September of 2022. It's called Freedom Through Strategy: How to Own Your Career, Prevent Burnout, Avoid Career Mistakes, and Boost Your Happiness. Oh my gosh, these are like all the things someone cares about. Tell me a little bit about the book. Why'd you write it? What are you passionate about for it? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
So, as you know, I'm a big traveler. Like, people are like, where do you live? I'm like, I don't actually have a home right now. I travel, and I was in Maine last winter on an island, and I went there to write a book. And as I mentioned, I write a lot on Medium. So someone from Scribd, which is SCRIBD, Scribd, reached out to me and said, hey, we would like you to write a book for us. And I was like, are you kidding me? So they said, they kind of laid it out how it would work. And I said, I'd love to do this. So I took some work that I had already kind of been working on, repurposed it. And really it is stories. The first chapter, and this is, I recommend to everyone, is stories about, God, why is this not working for me? Because people work with no strategy. Right. And their strategy is, if I work hard enough, I'll get noticed and I'll get promoted. Not a strategy. So I talk about I talk about the things that people do and that kind of don't work, and then the things that they might want to try doing to change it up. You can get it in an audio and ebook form, but it's the first chapter, I think, is one of my favorites, because I tell a story about a tennis player, and I tell how I kind of came to know a little bit more than the average person knows about tennis professionals. And it really does. If you like that, you'll like the whole book. So it's definitely worth checking out, just because most people are working like mad with no strategy.
Yeah. Such a great insight, by the way, of it circles back to like that concept of justice of, and I love how you said it, working hard enough, you will have your day.
Yeah.
And again, this isn't meant in a cynical way, but for our listeners, you will get to your destination so much faster if you're intentional about your corporate strategy, your career strategy, excuse me. So, Courtney, oh my gosh, this went by so fast. It is
I
such
know.
a delight to have you on the podcast. You're always welcome back at any point, especially whenever the next book gets published. And what do you want people to do in terms of if they want to follow up with you, if they're listening and they're thinking, well, geez, I'm thinking about my career. We do have JB Hunt, Tyson, and Walmart headquarters are all here locally. We have a lot of local listeners on the podcast. So somebody listening, maybe you need to call Courtney. Courtney, what's the best way for someone to reach out to you?
The best way to reach out to me is go to my website, CourtneyKirschbaum.com, and just look around and think, hey, is this person a fit for me? Check out what I offer. And if you want to book time with me, that's great. Also, if you're a reader, go to Medium. I post on Medium and you can follow me there and that will really give you a taste of what I do. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn all the time. So any one of those three places you can connect with me. I think if I'm not the only Courtney Kirschbaum on LinkedIn, I'm probably pretty close. And also that I love loads and loads of followers. So you'll know you found me. Also
Right.
my LinkedIn masthead, I have a picture of my book.
Great. I only know there's another Courtney Kirschbaum because I was looking up your profile and I was like, this isn't her. What the heck? But Courtney, thank you for coming on the podcast today. It was such a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to what's next for you.
Great being here. Thanks, Blake.
Hey, for our listeners, I'm going to put the link to Courtney's LinkedIn, the script page. You can check out the book. You can actually read it for free for 30 days if you've never been to Script before. I'm also going to put the link to her website, CourtneyKirschbaum.com. All of those are down in the episode description below. And again, if you're thinking about what's next for your career, if you're trying to take out the guesswork of your job hunt, you absolutely need to check out not just Courtney's content on Medium and on LinkedIn, but you got to reach out to Courtney as well. And hey, if you're checking out the podcast for the first time, what the heck are you waiting on? Click the subscribe button and the follow button so we can keep bringing you good advice wherever you are and wherever you are in your business. And don't forget, you can support the podcast on our Patreon. It's at patreon.com/goodadvice. And of course, we appreciate you guys who've been supporting the podcast long term. That's today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.